when there was a call. And that call was an eternal call in the womb of my mother, Lena Hines Jones, who comes from the family of Choctaw Native Americans, and my dad, who comes from Spanish-Italian background. So already it's mixed up from this inception. Over the years, there was always this wrestling in my spirit as I was growing and developing, that I always wanted to do the very best that I possibly could and be a positive example and role model for whomever and for everyone. So I felt that if you could make 100, I could make 110. If you could make 200, then I could make 450. If you settle for mediocrity, I didn't want to part. Because mediocrity was always, for me, the top of the bottom. And it had no place in the kingdom. So I wanted to be different, and I dared to be different. And I was different. Here comes the difference. My mom at the time of birth, of conception, was 40 years old. Now you have to imagine, at that time. My dad was 65. And she did not think that she was pregnant. She thought she was having some kind of stomach problem, where she was. 9 months later, here comes 13 and a half pounds. I was born. Thus began the physical difference. So as I began to grow, if that's possible, and as my mom began to continue to be involved in the church, I became the church baby, because when she got to church, they took the 13 and a half pounds and gave her a break. As long as there was music, I was fascinated. As long as there was preaching, I was mesmerized. As long as there was something different about the service, I was captivated. And thus began the journey. My dad said, when I was younger, you were born different. Dare to be different. Celebrate the difference. Use the difference for the betterment of the kingdom. Do well academically. Do well in every aspect of your life. He always said that. Always said that. My mom was one of those mothers who was involved with everything in which I was involved. Boy Scouts, band, choir, youth group. Everything involved, I was involved with, my mom was involved. To the point of every teacher that I had in elementary, in high school, every year my mom would have a different teacher in our dining room, letting them know they had the right to do whatever they needed to do, to help me do what I needed to do. And she wanted to get to know them and have them to get to know me. So I grew up knowing my teachers. But then the difference was, I not only saw my teachers in classroom every day, but I saw them on the weekend in church. Different. Dared to be different. As I grew, I was involved in an accelerated academic program all the way through. First grade, skipped second and third grade. Fourth grade, skipped fifth and sixth grade. Seventh grade, my mom said, well, I think we need to slow his roll a little bit, maybe. So I took the test, and I still was in the accelerated academic program. So by my junior year in high school, that was my freshman year in college. Different. That difference. I always thought, God, you called me to be different. help me to understand that difference. Prepare me for that difference. And give me the strength to accept the consequences of doing your will and not my own. So the difference began to develop even more so. My first teaching experience out of graduating from undergraduate school was in the poorest part of Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta. And I was like a kid in a toy factory. I was so excited to go to the Mississippi Delta to teach in the Mississippi Delta. I was employed by Falcon Junior High School, Mr. Fred Ford, the principal, in Falcon, Mississippi, in Darling, Mississippi. Outside of Darling, Falcon was the suburbs of Darling, Mississippi. And was a school that had pretty close to 1,500 to 2,000 students at that school from all of the surrounding areas. Now, you have to understand that the Mississippi Delta, you're talking about a farming area, very, very poor area. And here comes this new music teacher with all of these grandiose ideas of what he wanted to do, and never saying no, and never accepting no, and always challenging the students and the administration to not allow no to be a part of our vocabulary. So when the administration said, well, let me think about these kinds of things, I started saying, suppose God said at 9 o'clock this morning, he's going to take all the breath away from you. And where would you be? Okay, I got your biblical call coming in. My thing is, God has blessed us to have what we have. Let's be a blessing to our students, to our children. But if you're not going to do it, I'll do it. So in the Mississippi Delta, during the holiday times, I would talk with my parents and say to them, of course, how much I love them. I'm the baby. I'm the seventh child of the seventh. But my older sisters and brothers, of course, were grown and married when I came along, so I grew up as an only child in an area, in a neighborhood between 5 and 6 blocks that had no children at all, none. So I grew up around older people. My dad continued to say, and until he transitioned, that, I don't think I really need this, that I was born different and that I was born grown. Because 13 and a half pounds, first of all, being grown. And second, I always had a mind of my own when I was a baby. Never cried for anything except for when a fly was in the room or when my diaper was wet. My mom said that. Too much information, but I can tell you about the specialized ministry. But I need to set it up so you'll understand who I am. If you don't know my story, then you don't know me. If you don't know someone's story, then you don't know them. And thank you for sharing your story. I was so moved because we have some similar experiences that we need to talk. And so, as I worked in the Delta, at holiday times, I would say to my parents, I'm going to send you Christmas gifts. I'm not coming home for Christmas because I want to stay in the Delta with the children. So every Christmas holiday, one of the families of the students would invite me to stay in their home in the Delta, the poorest part. I was in heaven. I was in heaven. Homes that had no indoor plumbing. Homes that had very little to no heat. Homes that had very little space for 7 and 8 people in a family in which to live. But it was a joy for me to be in that environment because I felt like I was there for a reason. Not knowing what the reason was, but I knew that I was there, that wrestling, that bubbling in my spirit was there for some reason. That desire to be there, to be in that environment, to be a part of that was very, very strong. So I began to pray to God for godly direction and godly purpose. So often we have a purpose with no direction. And so often we're going in a direction and have no purpose. But I wanted to always be in the will of God in everything that I did and continue to do that. No matter how it affects someone else that they don't understand, then that's my job to help them to understand. Because that's kingdom building. And that's a means of witnessing. So, as I began to work through the 2 years of teaching in the Mississippi Delta, I began then to look at the desire to do graduate work and the need to do graduate work, because in some areas, you have no piece of paper other than the undergraduate degree to help open some doors. So I applied to graduate school, and there was this program that was developed at Jackson State University, because it was in the state of Mississippi, that had an application for 4 applicants to make. And of the 4 applicants that were going to be chosen for this special program, it was going to be a 2-year master's program intensively done in 1 year. And I was the last person to find out about the program, the last person to apply, and the first person to be accepted in the program. God set me up way down there. So a year later, I am graduating from Jackson State University with a master's degree in clinical psychology and a minor in music, because I was always interested in the mind and never wanted to get away from music. My concentration was music therapy. And I never wanted to get away from sacred music. Loved opera, loved art songs, but never wanted to get away from sacred music. Never wanted to do anything that was not going to be, that I could not use and be a part of the church. So the wrestling began. After being accepted then to be a part of the faculty and administration at Jackson State for 4 years, that wrestling over the 4 years began to get a lot more intense. What am I going to do, God? What is it that you can have me do? Every Monday was my day off from work, but I never took the day off on Monday. This particular Monday, it was just something heavy about that Monday. I went into the office, and it was just not going to be right. So I decided I would go home that afternoon and just spend some time in the corner, on my face, going before the Lord. So I went home. I want you to imagine this building. This is the apartment building. As in my denomination, Church of God in Christ, we say, I'd like for you to imagine in your sanctified mind, see in your sanctified mind, this apartment building. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of this building. And as you ascend the stairwell to the 2nd floor, all of the front of the buildings where the living rooms is all glass. It's all glass, so you can have a sliding door to the left as you enter in your front door. Imagine that all glass, so you have your living room. As you leave the living room and go down the hallway, the first room to the right is the kitchen. Slightly down to the left is the bathroom. All of this inside is all wall, all brick. No sunlight can get through there to the bedroom. Going down the hall all the way, first bedroom, second bedroom, all the way to the end, which is what I took as my bedroom, and had the first bedroom as a study. In my bedroom, going in the door, here's a wall, here's a wall, here's a wall, here's a window, here's a wall, here's a wall, that's the bedroom. Bed, dresser, da-da-da, rocking chair. I'm seated in the rocking chair after having gone through a period of meditation and just literally asking God, what is it that you would have me do? Where is it that you would have me go? Tell me, show me. And I'm between sleep and awake. I hear, heard, Herbert. And I immediately said, yes, Lord. And when I said, yes, Lord, there was this beam of light. No sunlight can get back there. This beam of light, nowhere else, but right on me and the rocket ship. I immediately knew that I had been called by God. And so the struggle with what to do about that began. Now let's back up a little bit. During the course of the wrestling, I was looking for graduate schools where I could attend also to do music and sacred dance at the same time. And those institutions were far here. And one of the institutions at which I was looking was Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. And so I did all of the information, looked at the seminary and applied to the seminary, put it in the back burner because I thought that's not going to happen. So we move on and we apply somewhere else, and that may not happen, and we apply somewhere else. Well, the light shining on me in the bedroom. 2 days later, Wednesday, I received a letter from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary saying I had been accepted to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary to do the Master of Divinity. Okay, God, I got my answer. So, at the end of that month, I wrote a letter of resignation for my position at Jackson State University to become effective that spring in May, with the intention of enrolling in Pittsburgh Theological Seminary the following September, the following fall. So I contacted the seminary, Tim Snyder, registrar at the time, John Walls, who was here at the time, to let them know that I accepted the offer and that I would be coming. And so they corresponded back and wanted to know itinerary, how will we know what you look like, da 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 da. I described what I would be wearing the day I got off the plane, and I would be the only one with an army of luggage coming to Pittsburgh. Got to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary on the campus. At the time, there may have been 12 African Americans, maybe on the campus. That wasn't an issue. That wasn't an issue. I come from a civil rights family. I come from a family that's mixed, so that wasn't an issue. Whether coming African Americans or non-African Americans or internationals that were there, that wasn't an issue. But the issue for me was that there seemed to have been a disconnect among the African Americans and a disconnect with the African Americans and the rest of the seminary. So it was like a them and us. And in my spirit, I'm saying, this ain't gonna work. This ain't gonna work. Something has to happen that needs to be a catalyst for developing community in the real sense of the word. So, being from the do the very best that you possibly can and everything that you can, spirit started rising. And so I started talking with seminary students, seniors, middlers, my class, the ones who are already here, about what is it that we can do that can bring us together outside of the classroom. Let's talk about those things. What can we do? My degree in vocal performance and choral conducting, I'll be willing to do a recital and involve the community in the recital. I'm saying the seminary community and the community outside of the gate. Not the them and us, but let's use the universal language and pull the communities together. And thus began my series of having recitals every year, right in this room, with George Tutwiler as my accompanist. And Reverend Councilman Ricky Burgess as my narrator for all of my recitals. So as we began to do the recitals, I began to talk with other seminarians about their interests. There were people who were art majors and were struggling with the fact that you just don't do art in church. I have a degree. I can't do art in church. Red flags going up. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, there's an issue. I have interest in those people who are not involved in relationships that are male and female. How can I minister to them? There's another issue that's going on. So we began to talk about issues among ourselves that needed to be addressed from a theological perspective without bashing. And so we developed a drama group that would address issues. And I would be the role of the voice of God. Very few of them had a deep bass voice, so I would be the voice of God, speaking, never seeing me, but always hearing my voice on the microphone somewhere. We began to develop the drama ministry with seminarians, designed to address issues in society, in the church, issues with which we were struggling as individuals, etc., etc. Out of that, then, came the interest of some of the people who began to realize what was happening, and then Dr. Hare, Dr. Gordon Jackson, Jim Walther, all of my precious professors began to say, Herb, has it ever occurred to you that you're called to be different? Boom! There it was. There it was. Out of the clear blue yard, I'm thinking, here comes God's confirmation of a difference that was stated in the womb that was going to happen. So we began to develop drama groups on campus, the choir with George Tutwiler in every genre possible. And then I developed a liturgical dance group on campus. In that class, my middle year, the junior class had a husband and wife team, Derek and Milana Nelson Armico. And both of them happened to be liturgical dancers. Their wedding was all danced. Oh. And so I talked with Derek and Milana Nelson Armico about my desire to involve drama, music, dance, and theology. And I want the degree to reflect that. I want the community to be reflected in what we do with those art forms. So I began then to apply to Duquesne and University of Pittsburgh for music aspects, music programs, music focus, and had my classes and coursework still here at the seminary. So I began to cross-register, and the buzz got across the campus that I was taking all these courses, and I don't see how you can do it, I don't see what's happening, da 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 da. And out of that was birthed me being the first to graduate with the Master of Divinity from Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, with concentration in theology, dance, music, and drama. Thus began specialized ministry in a formalized manner. After graduating with the Samuel Boyce Music Award, being able to introduce the Presbyterian moderator at the time Boy, I was in hard heaven. Being chosen, Dr. Samuel Callion came to campus our first year as president of the seminary. Dr. Callion, in the first meeting to the seminarians, talked about where his vision was for moving the seminary and what he'd like to see happen. And he asked, may I see, who is Herb Jones? I am he. I'd like to see you after this meeting, please. All right, what have I done this time? So meeting with Dr. Callion talked about the fact that he thanked me for representing Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in the best possible manner, not just in class, but off campus as well. And that it had been observed by faculty, it had been put in writing by churches, it had been put in writing by community people, that they had this African American second and third career person who was representing the seminary. So we wanted to reach out to areas that didn't normally have a relationship with the seminary. So guess who became the person who started going into these remote areas to introduce them and present the seminary? Moi. How would I do it? To God be the glory. Through hymn festivals, through recitals, congregationals, involvement, and thus began the relationships in the remote areas, churches and bars and everywhere else in London, all those, not overseas, not that bars, but Pennsylvania, and those remote areas. Lancaster, the Moravian Church, did a full recital there in the Moravian Church. So our relationship and our outreach as seminarians and as Pittsburgh Theological Seminary began to develop even more so. Still, we are the frozen chosen. Still, during that era. We're still referring to it as the cemetery, Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. Not that you have not heard that before, I'm sure. But because of my love for God and because of my love for who I am in the kingdom, because of my love for Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, it was my desire to make sure that if you didn't know about the seminary, I needed to tell you about the seminary. I needed to talk to you about the seminary. Now, if we can talk about, let's do this. I will be willing to come to your church to do a presentation, a musical presentation. And if you will allow me 10 minutes, I can tell you seminary in 10 minutes. I can talk about the seminary in 10 minutes. So through that whole area of music, using that as the door opener is how I began to walk therein. Upon graduating from the seminary, I went to Yale to their sacred music program. And understand that Yale's sacred music program is the old Union Theological Seminary's program from years earlier. Now, let's put a comma there and do a backup real quick. While we were at the seminary, one of my projects in liberation theology was to talk about the plight and the struggle, the successes, and the life of Dr. James Cone, the liberation theologian. So I contacted the office of Dr. Cone and got permission to come to New York and interview Dr. Cone and spend time with him as I researched for my project. So through that whole door being open, that happened. Going to, fast forward, here we are at Yale, and I'm on the panel to present information about specialized ministry. What do you do in specialized ministries? And my specialized ministry, as you are aware, is that of music. And on the panel was also the whole concept of let's do a little reflection on music and civil rights, music and liberation theology, music and women's studies. On this panel was Dr. James Cone. On this panel were international women's studies people. On this panel were all these big dignitaries, and here I was. I began by saying to them, I'm a proud graduate Yale student of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and I'm the first to begin to tell you about PTS. If you don't know about PTS, that broke the ice up, so we started having a fun time. And then we began to look at the fact of, what does this mean? So, you've got pride for Yale, pride for Harvard, pride for Princeton, pride for PTS. And so we began to look at the concept of communities, different communities coming together to celebrate communities. Out of that was birthed what is now the 11th year of Let Freedom Sing in Pittsburgh, where two communities coming together that would not normally come together. Urban meeting suburban. We started by having East Liberty and Murraysville coming together. We're going to do it 1 year. And here we are 11 years later, celebrating community. Not just Murraysville and Pittsburgh, East Liberty, but all of the areas. Through the idiom of music, through the idiom of dance, through the idiom of drama, through theology, celebration of diversity, celebration of sensitivity to different cultures, celebration of who we are in the kingdom, and celebration of the kingdom. In the words of Henry VIII, I don't want to keep you long, and I won't keep you long, but I needed to share with you, to give you a capsule, lots of issues of specialized ministry. I'll leave with you this thought and these facts. As a graduate of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, I stand before you as the first African American to graduate from the University of Mississippi Department of Music with a doctorate in choral conducting, performance pedagogy, and choral music education. The first African American and the only one with that degree. I stand before you as a Pittsburgh Theological Seminary graduate on the shoulders of Gordon Jackson and on the shoulders of William Orr, and on the shoulder of George Tutwiler, on the shoulders of those seminarians who went before me, on the shoulders of those professors who went before us and taught us and challenged us and dared us to be different, to be the first and only graduate student to ever head the choral program at the University of Pittsburgh, to be the first and only African American to be director of choral activities at the University of Pittsburgh. Going from there, as a PTS graduate, to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, to be the director of the Inspirational Chorale and Schola Cantorum. From there to the University of North Dakota, where I was the only African American faculty and only African American administrator there, developing the course in ethnomusicology and theology and the arts. I stand before you a proud Pittsburgh Theological Seminarian, one who loves the Lord, one who loves people, one who celebrates life, one who does not care whether you like me or not. I'm not here for you to like, but you gotta love me to get the glory. That kind of person. I stand before you as a proud Pittsburgh Theological Seminarian whose oldest gospel choir is the first and only gospel choir in the history of the Grammys to be nominated for a Grammy. To stand before you as a Pittsburgh Theological Seminarian who was director of the Concert Singers of Ole Miss, which is the top choir in Ole Miss. And by invitation only, you can go to the Choral Olympiad in Germany. And they competed and came back with the gold medal for the United States in choral music. A proud seminarian whose mom and dad said, you are different, dare to be different. Gordon Jackson used to always use one word for people who were very, very special to me. And I did not know that until his wife said that to me. And she said, Herb, Gordon calls you precious. He never uses that term. And you're precious. And I'm thankful to be precious in the eyes of God. And precious, a precious PTS graduate. God bless you.